So, here we are, Dave Taylor. Okay, why don't you just give us a brief introduction, who you are, what your name is. Let's just do the basics, just to get started here. Who are you? What's your deal? Just brief.
I'm Dave. My deal. Jesus. A lot of my career was as a game developer. A chunk was as a computer engineer and teacher.
Okay.
Representative.
You're underselling yourself. We're going to get into that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So.
I'm best known for being one of the coders on the original Doom and Quake games.
Right. That's where we're going to start.
Okay.
So. Your first credit is Doom in 1993. Is that when you first started it in 93 or 92?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, my question is, was it extremely intimidating working with John Carmack as like your first job as a programmer? Was that your first actual real job as a programmer or just your first job in the game industry?
That was my first commercial job as a game developer. And yeah, it was intimidating as shit. Nobody really knew or told me that, oh, by the way, you're working for one of the best coders in the game industry. So I just thought like, oh, he's an average game developer, game coder. That means I suck balls. And I do kind of suck balls, but like, working with someone like Carmack, you can't help but see your game get up real fast, real quick, right? Just trying to tread water. And so it was very intimidating, and the way I often like to describe it is like, I'd say, hey, look, I got the status bar working, and he'd be like, hey, yeah, check it out, I'm levitating in my chair. It's like it was sort of how different his productivity and his genius was from anybody else I'd met. So yeah, but it was intimidating, but it was also you're young and I was young and I mean, how we all were, except for Jay and Bobby, and you don't really think anything's impossible, right? And if there's an existence proof of something even closer, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, no problem, And so I thought for a while there, oh yeah, if I work harder, I'll just catch up with them, But it's like taking off at an exponential rate. There's no catching up. So it was a big lesson in humility and sort of just pacing yourself and what can happen if you burn yourself out if you try to paddle too hard to keep up.
Yeah, I was intimidated by him. I've never even met him. Back then I'd be sitting at home like, I'm playing a game right now and John Carmack's probably reading some SIGGRAPH paper. Like, what is wrong with me?
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it'd be like working. Like, were you just kind of like, my job is to do the things he doesn't want to do so he can aim his giant brain at whatever real problem needs to be solved? Like what kind of things did you code versus him, and did he have anything to say about what you were doing?
Yeah, no, he told me what to work on.
Okay.
And it was stuff, and I think what he was doing, you'd have to ask him.
Yeah.
How he managed me and what I was like to manage, but I think he started me on easy shit. And then I think he just tried throwing harder shit at me to see where I'd break, and I broke a few times. But yeah, I think that's how he approached it. I'm not sure, but really there wasn't a lot of management. There was no source code control.
Right.
And it was mostly like, we've got shit to do, and someone mentions something. It was that classic tiny game. People forget like. There's like 6 people in all of dev for Doom, right? And so those tiny company mechanics take shape where it's like there's no like issue ticket. It's just like you're playtesting one day and someone mentions, oh fuck, I wish this worked better, and you're like, oh, let me make that work better. I've always been really strongly motivated by helping someone out in code. So if someone says, oh man, it'd be so much more convenient if I could do this, or wouldn't it be cool if this did this, and I'm like, fuck, I want to be your hero,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just wild. I would consider, I don't know about you, but I would consider id the first like gaming rock stars. I mean, there were people that were famous who made games before, but like I feel like as like the first gaming rock group, like.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like
Okay,
that
yeah,
combination,
I can see that.
they were like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or something of their
Definitely
era.
not the Beatles.
Not the Beatles, but you know what I mean?
That's
Like they
Richard Garriott.
Richard.
He's the Beatle. Right?
Okay.
In my pantheon, anyway.
How do you make that distinction? Like the Beatles versus what id was like. What would you compare id to musically? Let's say if we're going to continue this analogy.
Oh no, what are we doing? Well, I mean, I guess
Metallica. I don't know.
they're Poison or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. They're like Metallica. They're much closer to Metallica.
And Garriott is just like one. Which Beatle is Garriott?
Garriott is probably, he's really not a Beatle, is he? He's so playful and hedonistic and so intense. Who's like that? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know enough about music history.
But so you have a relationship with Garriott? Because you're from Texas, so you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he. So we were kind of neighbors. You know, I lived up the road from him, and he published my game Abuse after all that, and we were friends. He and his girlfriend and me and my wife were like couples friends, you know. And his wife was a personal trainer, and she helped train us, and we did various things together. But super nice guy, as I'm sure everybody has told you.
Yeah.
And just a really fun guy. But he was bringing this full circle here. He was my first interview in the game industry. Oh. So I started off by doing something called Game Bites, BYTES, which was a floppy disk magazine that was edited by Ross Erickson, who started Xbox Live Arcade, and since passed away due to COVID. Very sad. But I was reviewing games, thinking, "Holy shit! I can do a thing where I play games and I just review them, and that's my job." And I was doing that while studying electrical engineering, and it was a lot more fun than what I was studying. And then I very quickly realized, wow, a lot of games kind of suck ass, and I don't want to play them, and I hate this. And anybody with an asshole can, write about a game. So how do I interview people that I really want to meet? And so I really wanted to meet Garriott, and I was like, oh, I'll interview him, right? And so that was my excuse, and I interviewed him, and then I interviewed Chris Roberts, and I'm like, okay, I'm out of people in Austin that I actually want to meet. So I stopped interviewing people until id came on the scene with Wolfenstein 3D, and they were still a tiny little company and not super huge yet. And so I did a phone interview with the whole fucking team on the call, and there was always this super geeky guy in the background who answered all my geekiest questions, and sometime after the interview, I just sort of whined in an email saying, "Oh, gee, how can I work in games, right?" And I had time to just write, and that guy turned out to be Carmack, and he needed he needed someone to do a Sega Genesis port of Wolf 3D, and
Sega Genesis port of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
How was that experience?
Yeah,
well, did you end up working? I mean, that never came out.
No. Thank God.
Right.
So I was doing my senior lab, and he was like, "Could you please just quit school?" And I was like, "No, fucking dude, this is my last thing over the summer before I graduate with a goddamn degree. No, just quit. Work for us." I was like, "No, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll read the Sega Genesis manual so that I'm up to speed by the time so I can hit the ground running." And I got there, and he was like, "Fuck that, we're behind on Doom. Work on Doom instead." And I was like, "Oh fuck." In a sense, I was like, "Oh fuck," because I'd studied this thing that was now not being applied, and everything was being developed in DOS, and I didn't know the first fucking thing about coding in DOS. And I'm a Unix guy, and so I was all excited that they were using Next Step and all that sort of stuff. And so I spent as much time as I could in Next Step, and I very quickly did the Linux port because I fucking didn't want to work. I wanted to work in something I was comfortable working in, But
That's interesting. eventually there was a Super NES version of Wolf 3D, but
Okay.
but didn't you work on the Jaguar version of Doom?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I heard a story before we move on. I think I've asked you about this before. That I read somewhere way back in the day, it was probably some lost Usenet post. Did you work on the networking code for the Jaguar Doom?
No. Fuck
No.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked on some of the network code for Quake, but just a little bit. But for Doom, I was mostly working. I was mostly working on the sound and the music engine.
Because I heard a story that the Jaguar networking chip was so buggy that when it was working on the Jaguar version of Doom, they had to put an ice cube on top of the networking chip on the Jaguar to keep it from overheating while developing it. I heard that story.
Close. I don't, unless, I mean, I certainly never did, but maybe Carmack did, but I certainly never put an ice cube anywhere near the chips. But we did have to leave a Jaguar in the freezer and take it out.
Well, that's probably where that story came from.
Yeah, okay.
Which is funny because I've actually had modern hardware that I've had to do.
Yeah, so I worked on the chip. So there was one chip that was just fucked.
Yeah.
And the thing that it was fucked about it is that it could not write to memory reliably. And as a coder, oh Jesus, that's something you need. But when you think about it for a second, you're like, well, wait a minute, that actually reminds me of network code. So in a way, it's like doing UDP packets with your own goddamn memory. And so we realized, okay, well, this is where we'll put the sound, because if you write out bad memory with sound, it'll just come out as a pop, but the world doesn't end.
Yeah.